themselves, and they weren't really aware of the severity of it. Many times while they were in the NICU, they didn't think that he was going to make it, and so it was kind of, they were all just kind of hanging on a thread, and then something would happen, like a fever could spike so much for him, and I mean a fever could change their life ultimately. And so they were really receptive to like getting all the help that they could. And in that 5 months that they were able to prepare themselves, they met with doctors and nurses and therapists that they would be working with if the little boy were to make it out of the NICU. And so they try to prepare themselves as much as they can, because they also had 2 little boys at home. So they normal for them was not going to be normal anymore, because the 2 little boys were going to be at home while one parent would be at the NICU at all times with the little boy. So they responded really well to receiving services, and I believe that with her, the mom, she is really involved in the community, and so it kind of gave you a sense of an awareness as like, I guess back to the normal thing, that, you know, kids are born with these kind of things, and there are people who do not take advantage of the services that are available to them. And when all these services, you know, people try really hard to go to school and get certified for these type of services, and then they're not used. So she's been a really good advocate for people who kind of just don't use their services, to show how much that they can really help, because now her little boy is walking, although he started walking after he was 2. Yes, that was delayed, but that was something that they never thought that would be able to happen. I don't think that the parents were uncomfortable. I think that they were happy that they were able to share their experiences with me, and knowing that they know my situation as well. Although we're not in the same boat, we still are very similar in working with therapists and not having a normal life with children. So I think that they were happy to talk and give information to people who would be able to use the information to better themselves.
Okay, that's excellent. Thanks, Natalie. For mine, I interviewed a friend of mine, and she does not have any special needs children. I'll just tell you briefly about her children, and then some experiences that she has had working with special needs children. She's a mother of 3 kids, and they all kind of follow in that range of normal development. And I think that's an interesting question, you know, what is normal? Because like Natalie said, it can vary from child to child, and how do you define exactly what normal is? But her oldest child was born after years of infertility. They struggled for like over 6 years trying to have her, and so when they finally did have her, she said that she would carry her around a lot more than probably other babies were being carried around. So her daughter kind of had just a few little delays in walking. She walked later than most of her counterparts because they didn't want to let her go. But then she noticed a difference in variation walking rates with her son, who was the second child, and he walked a lot sooner. You know, she wasn't holding him as much or as long, you know, as she had her daughter, and so he had achieved that milestone a little bit earlier. Their third child kind of blew them all away, because she just threw out all the norms of the siblings, and she, you know, she was fiercely independent. She was achieving things earlier than the other 2, and so she always was kind of on her toes with that third child. My friend did work with a special needs child before she was married. She worked at a daycare which serviced low SES families, and this child attended that daycare. He had cerebral palsy, and that left him with the mental capacities of a 3-year-old, and at the time that she knew him, he was 10 years old. She said he was enormous for his age. He was about 6 feet tall, and he had huge feet. And he was actually able to walk with a cane. And she said at first, it was awkward for her to work with him because he made loud, funny noises, and she wasn't really sure if he understood what she was saying. But over time, it became just more natural and more, comfortable working with him. What she did notice was that the children never felt uncomfortable around this young man. When they would go out on field trips, people would just, blatantly stare because he was so large and so awkward and made these funny noises. And the kids from the daycare, they just were like, come on, let's go, and just treated him like a normal kid in the group. And she thought that was really interesting. Even though he had this serious disorder, she said that his left arm was crippled, but his right arm was, he could use, and he was a perfect shot. So I just thought that was interesting that even though there was some really serious impairments that he struggled with, he had one area that he really excelled in, and I've heard that happens with other special needs kids, with especially autistic children. They will have, one area that they are just really brilliant in. And I don't know that that's across the board, but that might be something we can discuss later. Lastly, so she talked about knowing some parents that were uncomfortable and had a sense of denial about their special needs child that they had. And this child, this couple, she knew years later. And this family was in their ward, and they had a boy who was very obviously autistic. To her, he seemed autistic. He couldn't talk or wouldn't talk with other people. He would only talk to his parents and then in the home, in private. So we were assured that he was talking and that he was, they say, oh, he's super smart. And I don't doubt that he was, because of those, some of those abilities that autistic children can display. But the woman and her husband were in very serious denial. They wouldn't discuss his situation with anybody. They would just, like with primary workers, they wouldn't give primary workers any idea of how to best work with him and how to help him. And, they would, when one time my friend went to the mom as he approached kindergarten age, and she said, there's some really good public resources in the public school systems that they can test him, and they would put him in a good fit classroom. And, with teachers, it would be a very small class size because our school district does that. And he would have excellent resources to help him. And the woman was just startled, like deer in the headlights, she didn't say anything. And so then later that night, her husband called my friend and said, that made her really uncomfortable, and this is a very private issue, and we don't want to discuss it with anybody, and please don't ever bring it up again, basically. So that was kind of, one example of how the parents did have a sense of denial. And I don't know that they were embarrassed, but it's like they literally just could not accept that he had these special needs. And they weren't willing to develop a long-term plan for dealing with his special needs. So those were just some of the things that I learned from my interview with my friend.
Okay. That's interesting what you said, Laura, because I have similar experiences personally. My son is Asperger's, which is high-functioning autism, and I went through a period of denial too, so I can understand that parent, although I've come to realize that I was doing no service to my son by pretending that he didn't have a condition, and instead I've made a 180 and tried to be as proactive as I can to help him have a comfortable life. And because he's not a normal, what we call normal child, I've tried to make him as comfortable in this world as he can be, because this world is not normal to him. So anyway, I interviewed a neighbor down the street who moved in a few years ago, and she has 3 children, and her oldest child is the same age as my son, and they go to school together. And he has been diagnosed with ADHD, and he doesn't have an official diagnosis, but she says it's pretty certain that he is on the autism spectrum somewhere. He's very high functioning, but she hasn't sought a diagnosis, but she's pretty sure that he's autistic in some way or another. He's actually very similar to my oldest child, who is Asperger's. So she noticed some things as early as 18 months. He wasn't speaking and not really making any sounds at all. He had a lot of ear infections as a baby, and he had to get tubes put in. And then after that, he was able to make some sounds. And then his motor skills, his large motor skills were delayed. He didn't crawl for a very long time. And then I thought this was interesting. He never followed a natural progression of going from crawling to walking. Instead, he crawled for a very short period of time, and then he just started standing up in the middle of the room on his own and walking. He didn't pull up on furniture as most children do. So she thought that was kind of interesting. He potty trained late, but other than that, everything else was pretty regular with his teething and things like that. So mostly speech and motor skills. She also noticed, as with people who have, like Laura said, I think that you're right, it's not with every autistic child, but there is a trend with autistic children that they do develop one aspect of their development very rapidly, and they're very talented and gifted in one aspect. And for him, that was learning to read. He learned letters and sounds very quickly, and he watched learning videos that helped him, like Leapfrog, and he could sound words out at 2 years old. So that's something that he's been able to excel in. He has an IEP in school, and he receives services for speech and accommodations for homework. And he's received services since 3 years old, and I think he's still in occupational therapy as well. So let me make sure that I focus on these. So my point of view on the interview, I could relate. You know, this is a friend of mine. This is somebody who our children are friends. So I could really relate to her. She talked about the struggles with me and tried to be as proactive as I can to help him have a comfortable life. And because he's not a normal, you know, what we call normal child, I've tried to make him as comfortable in this world as he can be, because this world is not normal to him. So anyway, I interviewed a neighbor down the street who moved in a few years ago, and she has 3 children, and her oldest child is the same age as my son, and they go to school together. And he has been diagnosed with ADHD, and he doesn't have an official diagnosis, but she says it's pretty certain that he is on the autism spectrum somewhere. He's very high functioning, but she hasn't sought a diagnosis, but she's pretty sure that he's autistic in some way or another. He's actually very similar to my oldest child, who is Asperger's. So she noticed some things as early as 18 months. He wasn't speaking and not really making any sounds at all. He had a lot of ear infections as a baby, and he had to get tubes put in. And then after that, he was able to make some sounds. And then his motor skills, his large motor skills were delayed. He didn't crawl for a very long time. And then I thought this was interesting. He never followed a natural progression of going from crawling to walking. Instead, he crawled for a very short period of time, and then he just started standing up in the middle of the room on his own and walking. He didn't pull up on furniture as most children do. So she thought that was kind of interesting. He potty trained late, but other than that, everything else was pretty regular with his teething and things like that. So mostly speech and motor skills. She also noticed, as with people who have, like Laura said, I think that you're right, it's not with every autistic child, but there is a trend with autistic children that they do develop one aspect of their development very rapidly, and they're very talented and gifted in one aspect. And for him, that was learning to read. He learned letters and sounds very quickly, and he watched learning videos that helped him, like Leapfrog, and he could sound words out at 2 years old. So that's something that he's been able to excel in. He has an IEP in school, and he receives services for speech and accommodations for homework. And he's received services since 3 years old, and I think he's still in occupational therapy as well. So let me make sure that I focus on these. So my point of view on the interview, I could relate. You know, this is a friend of mine. This is somebody who our children are friends. So I could really relate to her. She talked about the struggles with, you know, people maybe watching them or judging them when they go in public. He has ADHD on top of his autism, and so, you know, it's really hard going anywhere. He doesn't listen. He doesn't understand time reference. When you say we have to leave in 5 minutes, he doesn't understand what that means. So things like that are really difficult for her, and I can totally relate to that. You know, every day is a struggle. It's not. I feel bad feeling bad because, you know, like Natalie said, there are so many people with things that are worse off, but it still is hard. And, you know, I just deal with my struggles, and she deals with hers as well. And we talked a little bit about how every day is a struggle, but you just do what you can. And there are little tactics that you can do to hopefully help your child get through it. As far as normal goes, even before I realized that I had an autistic child, I feel like that word is very subjective. I feel like as my generation has grown older and we've seen more of these autistic kids and kids with diseases and different developmental challenges, I feel like that word has become more and more subjective, and I don't know if it even exists anymore. Every child I see has some quirk or another, and I feel like you know, that word is just really hard to define nowadays. As far as the parents being the last to know if there was a delay with their child, I think that this mom was in the same boat as me. We kind of struggled with the fact that that could be true. And there is a period of denial. You don't want your child to be autistic, but there comes a point where you can't deny it any longer, and you know that you love your child and you want to help them. And that's what we discussed, that, you know, we're trying to do the best we can for our children, and part of that is not denying that they have the issue. And so she came to the awareness just like I did. The older the child got, the more it was clear that he was unlike his peers, and she knew she had to do something. I don't feel like she's uncomfortable with it now. I feel like she's doing well with it. She's using her resources and doing the best she can. So I think that she's a good mom. She's trying her best for her child. So.
You guys have shared such amazing things. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've learned so much already. But the mother I interviewed, we were in the same ward back home from my family of origin, and she has 2 children. They're 4 years apart, 1 daughter and 1 son. And points of the interview, neither of them had any persistent impairments, but there were some differences. Overall, it was clear that her daughter, which was the oldest, excelled more in spatial development, and her son excelled more in cognitive. So she believed that part of that could have been because she taught her son how to read at a younger age. And one example of this overall finding of Miss Mothers is that the daughter began to walk sooner and potty train sooner and in a more lasting manner, whereas her son was able to speak sooner, but potty training took longer. And she homeschools her children, and she said that she hasn't noticed anything as far as that goes, any special help that she's had to give either of her children as far as learning. She hasn't seen any signs of dyslexia or anything yet. She has said, though, that her daughter has a harder time focusing, so she said that maybe there's some ADHD there, but she has not looked into it. So that kind of goes along with question 3. Are the parents possibly the last to find out that there's a delay with their children? And I think she's still in that process. I'm not sure if her daughter does have ADHD, but it would seem that she's not really looking into it very hard at the moment. It either doesn't seem to be a stressful, pressing matter, or she's just kind of in denial a little bit. But back to question 2, what's my sense of the word normal? Like all of you guys have said, I think it's very subjective. Especially now, I think as time goes on and as the human race becomes more developed and well-rounded, I think that we have just really come to know that what is normal, you know? How do you even compare? What do you have to compare, you know, children back to? What's the reference point? There isn't one. Yes, there are important milestones and things that children have to develop and things like that, but, you know, there will always be some level of normative variation or maturational delay or something at the least, and I just don't think that that word can really apply anymore, personally. And for question 3, I got a sense that the parent that I spoke with, the mother, she was fairly receptive to, you know, how her children were developing, but I'm not sure if she was receptive to services. And I don't know if she would even know what's out there since she's homeschooling her children. But like I said, she didn't even seem to be super eager to look into her daughter not paying attention super well and keeping her focus. So that kind of made it seem like she maybe wouldn't be super receptive to receiving services either. And I got a sense that she was a little bit uncomfortable when I asked some questions that just most of these questions that, you know, I tried to do it, you know, very nicely and professionally, but it just seemed to be kind of a personal thing to her, and I think it is a personal thing to every parent, you know. So there was a sense of discomfort with the questions that I was asking, especially when I tried to ask a few follow-up questions about her daughter not paying attention very well in school. So she, like I said, she might be in denial, but overall, I think she's accepted the things of the past. I think she accepts that her daughter is a lot more physically, she's physically developed quicker than her son, and I think that she has accepted that her son has cognitively developed quicker than her daughter, and she seems to be very loving and to embrace at least those aspects of their variations in normative development. So.
Okay. The person that I interviewed this lady, and she has 4 kids, and their youngest son has Down syndrome. She has, I think her youngest son's 11, and then she has a boy that's probably 14 years old-ish, and then she has another boy that's like 18, and then a girl that's like almost 22. And all her other kids are normal. And hold on just a minute. So and so some of the things that, like everyone else has said, normal, I think nowadays we all have something, some issue, whether it be big or little. And normal is just part of everyday life. I think for this family, their sense of normal, you have to cope with a child that has a disability. That's just how your normal life is. When I was born premature, and so my parents' sense of normal for the first 2 years, I wasn't even on the charts. And so that's just how it was. And I think nowadays everyone has something. Usually there's some little issue or big issue, and that's just what society has to come and accept in this world. And when I was married, my ex-husband was blind, and his parents' sense of normal is different than someone else who maybe has a disability. And so that's what I think. And this kid didn't walk until he was about 3.5, and he's still having a hard time talking. And but the cool thing was he was completely potty trained with no accidents when he was 5 years old. So that's pretty neat. And then the next question. So the parents saw signs after he was born that he had Down syndrome. They didn't know, I think, when he was born. And while he was in the hospital, the hospital actually helped him to receive services. The hospital helped to set up those services for the family, so that was really kind of nice. And let's see, like right now, the child has a hard time with communication, so they have given him an iPad to help him to be able to communicate. And there was someone that worked with the child from when he was 2 months till he was about 3 years old, and that would come to the home and help the child. And I don't think the parents were uncomfortable at all. I think it's something these kind of parents deal with on a daily basis. They get ridiculed all the time. They get people looking at them in public. With all parents with people with disabilities, they get people looking at them in public like, oh my gosh, they stare at their kid or make comments or snide remarks, and that's just something the parents have to deal with on a daily basis. And let's see, she felt for a long time that after her son was diagnosed, this is my son, and I have to accept the fact that he has Down syndrome. And for a while, the mom didn't want to actually tell herself it was her son, if you kind of get what I'm saying. And it was her baby, and she could see him for what he was, is in the years after that they found out he had Down syndrome. Let's see. One of the frustrating things that this family has had to deal with is the fact that the county office of education or whatever, that's they won't help to pay for an iPad for this child, even though it helps him to communicate. But it's kind of frustrating to the parents about that part.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Should we discuss the second question now?
Yes.
Or the second part, I guess. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Do we want to take turns, like maybe just sharing any comments or thoughts we had about each other's things, or just how do we want to do that?
I just want to say, like looking back through all of your guys' topics, how are you guys marriage and family, or are you guys child development?
Marriage.
Child
I'm
development.
doing the university studies, but
Okay.
I've done child development and marriage and family.
Well, as a child development specialist or a marriage and family specialist, whatever, I think that we need to help, like parents, see that these services can actually benefit not only your child, but the family. Because when you can understand like how to talk to your child or get through to your child, that makes everything else easier because you are able to love your child in a better way, and they can to get that. So I think it's important, as we all saw, that like these services are here for a reason. And that we should like really encourage people to take advantage of these services.
I want to say something. So one thing I think that would be really helpful as a parent who's gone through this is, I mean, a lot of parents don't know what services are available,
right?
Or how to even go about getting them. I'm still in that boat. So if there was some sort of a way to educate parents on how to get the most services that they can. And also, I feel like that it would be really helpful if there was some sort of resources for the parents in how to emotionally comprehend all of this and how to deal with it. Because not only are they dealing with...
support group.
Yes, it's like not only are they dealing with everything going on with their child and the day-to-day struggles, but they need help themselves to process all of this because it's really hard to find out that your child is not normal and to accept that. It really is. I know when you're on the outside, it's easy to say, well, they're in denial, of course, and they probably are, but it is really hard to accept, because you don't want your child to be delayed.
Right.
You want your child to be normal. We all want the best for our children, and it's hard for a parent to realize that in order to give your kid the best, they need what they need. It might not be what every other kid needs. So to accept that.
Well, just a side note, when Oakley started her therapy at home, like the therapist worked with us as a family to like help us get to the next level and stuff. And when her time was up with Oakley, because she could only be worked with until she was 5 years old, she did not leave us alone. Like we got set up for the next stage. Yeah. And so it's like, I think that was great. And then like the next stage was starting school. And so she got to go to a great preschool program. And then when that preschool age ended, that same teacher was there, she helped us get like transition into kindergarten. So it's like, I think a lot of times people are just like, they know, like, like this is your son. Of course you know what to do next. It's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good for like people who are working with people with special needs children that that they're comfortable with the next stage or that they're comfortable with where they are. To say like, okay, I can get through 2 days with Oakley or I can get through 3 days with Oakley and feel comfortable with it.
You're a normal...
Oh, sorry. I'm pregnant right now, and my husband has a form of muscular dystrophy, and it is common for it to become more severe from generation to generation. So when we were talking about like if we wanted to test to see if our baby has that or not that we would do anything about it, obviously, but just to see, something the doctor said like really made me feel comforted. Like if we don't have the baby that we're hoping for that's 100% healthy, they just said need time to mourn the loss of the child you thought you would have. And I just think that goes with what Connie was saying. Like, I don't think that's selfish, and I don't think that's wrong. I think it's all right that parents need to feel like it's okay if it's hard for you, you know? Because, like you said, it's so easy on the outside to think like, oh, well, they're just having a hard time. I wouldn't be that selfish, blah, blah, blah. But I think that it's a process and it's a difficult situation. It's a wonderful situation, but it's also a difficult one as well.
Yeah. I think, Connie, I was interested in what you were saying about, working through that denial and stuff, and that's very normal, and that needs to be, something that we shouldn't judge. And I don't want to sound too harsh about this family. I actually know this family. They've been in our ward for years, that my friend was talking about, that had this son that he's now almost 7, and they still, to what we see, seem to be in denial as far as, like they receive no outside services. But I also understand that this family has a huge fear of, like, they don't want to send any of their children. They have another child that appears to not have his autistic issues. They won't send him to school. They don't want any government involvement. They have a high level of paranoia about, doctors' involvement. And so I think part of that plays into their inability to just kind of accept who he is and maybe work with the primary workers. So I was wondering, Connie, how long did it take for you, and Natalie, you probably went through your own phase of denial, to work through that and get to where you did that 180 and you were more proactive about things?
Okay. Well, first of all, I hope no one thought I was calling them out, because I know, like,
That's okay.
And I've been there too, where I'm like, wow, you really need to help your child, and but I've been on both sides, so it's weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, my child, I think that, hindsight is 20/20. Going back, we could tell from as early as about 18 months that he was either really gifted or really weird, or something was going on, because he could, like, for example, he could watch a Disney movie and he could memorize the score. He'd be walking around singing the score, like the background music, not the songs the kids usually sing, with words, but he would be humming this. And then when he got to be older, like around 3, he was struggling with speech, and we had him in speech, and I thought, that's it, it's just speech, there's nothing else. I did have him tested for autism, and they said he was so high, he was so high that he wasn't. And I think that he's just so high functioning. But I started to notice when he got into kindergarten and first grade and he was around his peers, because he's my oldest child. I have 3 that are really close together. So my first 3, they kind of all sort of acted similarly, and probably because he's the number 1 child, he's the model for the other 2. So they were kind of just doing what he was doing, and I just assumed this is all normal. Or his quirks, I thought, he'll just grow out of those. But when I started seeing him in school with his peers, I used to volunteer, and I'd go in and watch, and I could just see stark differences. Socially, cognitively, just ways that they do things. There were so many differences, and every year in school it was getting more and more apparent. He was becoming more and more different from his peers. And in first grade, in the middle of first grade is when I started to pursue something, and I didn't know what it was, because I didn't know what to do. We still had speech, but we talked with his pediatrician, got him into occupational therapy, and then I spoke with a couple of friends who had autistic children, and they urged me to seek a diagnosis, which we did. And he wasn't diagnosed till 8 years old, which is late for Asperger's kids. They're usually by 5. But ever since then, we've done a 180. We still have our moments of we wish it wasn't so, but I find that I'm more of a better mom for him when I accept it and when I try to work with it.
Thanks.
That's awesome.
That would be really hard.
I think, too, like you guys have said, we have to raise these kids as a normal parent in a different world than the kid lives in. You know what I mean? We have to kind of get in their box, and it's kind of like that video we had to watch last week. I don't know if it's this class or another class, but we have to get in the box with the kid and, like, figure out their environment, because we're not in their environment. We have to kind of figure out how to best work in their environment within the normal environment we live in.
Yep.
For me,
One of the
if I
go
could
ahead.
just, sorry, you
Go
can
ahead.
go.
It's all right.
No, I just think that, like Connie said previous, not in her last statement, but a support system, and that's something that I was able to get. I have a great group of friends who kind of like went through therapy and like understand kind of everything, and so I have like people that I can trust, and I like they're out of school today, but they're over at a friend's house, and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about the meltdowns or what if a meltdown happens. Like she knows everything. She knows what to do. But I think it's also good to have a friend, not necessarily a spouse, because they're going through it as well. Just to be able to call or go over and just cry, and because it's a lot. It is a lot. You know, it's like. One instance that sticks out in my head is that both of my girls were wearing a Minnie Mouse sweatshirt, but they weren't matching, and that wasn't okay because it had to be what Oakley had in her mind. And I mean, we were going to Costco, and 40 minutes later, we were able to leave the house, and it's like that's just maddening, and
that's a normal day for us over here.
Yes.
That's normal.
You know, and it's like everyone's like, you always dress your kids the same, and I'm like, yes, I do, and it's normally them. Like normally they want to match because they're close in age and they love being each other's sisters and whatever, and so normally they match, and so people always give me a hard time, and I'm like, I know I never thought I was going to be that parent, but some days it's just easier if they match, because then there's not a debate on, well, she's wearing those shoes and I'm not wearing those shoes, or she's wearing that sweatshirt and how come her sweatshirt has pockets and mine doesn't, and how come hers has a hood and mine doesn't. You know, it's just like you just want to kind of pull out your hair. And even like with Christmas coming up, they're like, well, what do the girls want? And I'm like, what you get one, you get the other. And they're like, well, that's not fun. I'm like, for my girls, that's great. Like, they love having their own things. And then for me, it's great because I don't have to be like, this is hers and not yours. You didn't get this for your birthday, blah, 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 blah. And so everyone's kind of, like, come to know that. But, like, back to what I was saying, like, you just need someone to be able to go to. It's my friend Melissa for me. And I can just go over and I can just cry. And she doesn't look at me. She doesn't try to solve my problems. She doesn't try to, you know, give me advice. She just is like, I'm sorry. That's all she can say, and that's all I need.
Yeah, just that support.
We need to wrap this up. So maybe one or two last comments before before Laura finishes up for us.
Yeah, I thought as far as like, you know, the normative variation and maturational delays, I wondered when Jalynn was talking about the parent that had the child with Down syndrome, the thought came to me, you know, that the parent was really pleased that that child was potty trained by the age of 5. And I thought, you know, here we're talking about all these, you know, what is normal. Well, did that child have a normative variation with that? Was that early potty training for a Down syndrome child? I don't know because I don't have a Down syndrome child. But, you know, even within those different disorders, there are probably normal variations, and so that was really exciting for them, it seemed, to have a child.
And she said too,
early.
There were no nighttime accidents too, and I can think of cousins I've had where they've been 8 years old and they still wet the bed. You know, like I'm like, wow. So to have this kid not have any accidents at the same time as being potty trained, that was pretty, I thought that was pretty like a milestone, you know, because most kids still have accidents when they're in kindergarten and first grade, you know. I don't know, I'm guessing they do, but I thought that was pretty cool that he was ahead in somewhat in an aspect in that area, you know.
Well, I think it's really important what Laura just said, is that every aspect of a child, you know, like in Down syndrome or autism or Asperger's or whatever, there's going to be normal things that happen in that group, or, you know, and it's going to be, so I think that you have to, when we talk about those terms, you have to think about the group of children we're talking about. Like, are we talking about those with no developmental delays? Are we talking about those with Down syndrome? Are we talking about those with autism? Because each one of those are going to have different definitions of those normal. And you can see that it's normal from Connie and from me to have those meltdowns, to have a meltdown so easy that it takes 40 minutes to get out of the door. That's normal for Connie and I. So it's like that. I think those terms are hard to define because you have to define what group you're talking about.
Right.
I think you're right. I think it all is in perspective. Definitely. There's a silly quote, what is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. But it's so true. It depends on your outlook. It depends on the paradigm that you're looking through as far as
Exactly.
develop.
Laura,
Right.
do you want to finish up?
Sure. No, I think this was a really great discussion, just covering from top to bottom what is normal, and that was something that Natalie brought out in her comments, that not every kid is perfect. What's normal to one is not going to be normal for the next. I think it's also, in speaking of the terms of normal, interesting, one of you, I can't remember who, sorry, pointed out that this child was, for them, they're living with parents and their lives, their perspective is not normal for them. So this is a child with autism or Asperger's or Down syndrome, and we look at that family as, oh, they have a child that's not normal. Well, that child's looking at the world going, this isn't normal for me, and I need you to function for me, for my level of normal. And it sounds like both Connie and Natalie, you deal with that on a daily basis, and I really applaud you for those efforts in helping your child function at their level of what's normal for them, to help make the world normal for them. I think also we covered the fact that parents that struggle with children who have these maturational delays or transient disorders or persistent impairments, especially the persistent impairments, they need resources, and they need to be educated on how to find them, and they need to be able to not only have those resources, but they also need to be able to process and work through some of the denial that goes along with that, how to help their child, and just get that basic support for themselves as well. Some of us, a few of us, like Jordan and myself, have interviewed parents who did not have children with any developmental or identified developmental disorders. But even within those spectrums, with my parent and also with Jordan's, they both had children that they had questions about some of the, where they were in their development, and was there a delay, and like Jordan had said, I don't really know. The parent didn't really want to investigate further those issues of, with struggling with her focus. My parent, her son had some serious maturational delays, and she delayed him, held him back from kindergarten to help him progress. And so but she also had an education in child development. That was her bachelor's degree, so she kind of knew what she needed to do for him. And then we just in conclusion wrapped it up with our normal variations within each of those different disorders. And so I think this was a great discussion. We covered a lot of really important topics and themes, and I really just appreciate everybody's input. Good job.
Good job, everybody.
Good job, everybody. Before I end it, does anyone else have anything else to say?
You guys are amazing. Thanks for teaching me so much.
It was fun.
Thank
Yep.
you all.
Thank you, guys.